Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Laura LeBur, and I'm a marine science educator at the Smithsonian Marine Ecosystems Exhibit. Welcome back to our Career Dives, live conversations in marine science. This summer series is going to be highlighting the career tracks, interests, and projects of marine science professionals working with the Smithsonian Marine Station and the Marine Ecosystems Exhibit. So while people are joining, I want to just say you can go ahead and use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to let us know where you are right now. We have a lot of people joining us from Maryland, from Canada, from Michigan, from all over the world, which is really cool. We're very excited. As everyone joins the webinar, I'd like to just point out a few of the features. So you can use the Q&A box to ask us questions and ask questions to the guest. The Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen, and it looks like two little speech bubbles that have a Q&A. So you can submit a question at any time, but we'll try and get to them at the end of the program or as they are appropriate. Please be patient with us. There may be a high influx of questions and we may not have time to get to them all. I'll mention this again at the end, but if you ask a question and we're not able to get to it live and you really want to know an answer, please feel free to email us at smseducation, it's all one, at si.edu. So that's how you'll be able to get a hold of us after if you have a question and we don't get to it live. There's another educator, that's Erin, on the background to keep track of your questions. So if you see messages in the chat box from an Erin, that's one of our other educators, and she's going to be helping post some important information in the chat. You can use the chat box to send us messages. Your comments are visible only to Smithsonian staff, so please keep them on topic and appropriate. And today's program will be about 40 minutes. So I think that's all the housekeeping items. Let's take a peek at the chat and see where everyone else is from. Hey, Ray from Nova. Hey, Jared from Pittsburgh. Gabriella from Brazil, welcome. Okay, so let's get started. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you today Bill Hoffman. He's the aquarium manager and head aquarist for the Smithsonian Marine Ecosystems Exhibit, which is the outreach arm of the Smithsonian Marine Station. He's been here from the very beginning in 2001, and it's 19 years later. He continues to care for the exhibits, curate content, and manage the team. So it's great to have you on Career Dives, Bill. Welcome.
Thanks, Laura. It's great to be here.
So we're going to jump into your career story, and I have told you a million times, I think it's a really cool and super unique because you have been at the Smithsonian for your whole career, which is so rare anymore. But let's go back all the way to the beginning. You want to share your screen with us and tell us, how did you get interested in marine science?
Okay. I'm sharing now.
Yep.
Well, you know, most of us at least, spend way too much of our time working. So to me, you know, there's nothing better than being able to call what you love your job. And so today I'm going to tell you a little story about my convoluted journey, my fortuitous journey, because I feel very fortunate to be in a position where I really do enjoy my job and enjoy going to work every day. So it really goes back, you know, to the beginning, to what I call the Billy years. I'm a junior, and so I was called Billy up until, I'll tell you that later. But anyhow, there are some photos of me here, and it really, I guess, goes to my father. You know, I was born in Pittsburgh, raised in the city, up through, I think, at least 4th grade, right in the city. But we had woods behind us, and we really explored. The photos that you see there, and this is something that I realized in seeing this photo, but the one on the left is we really had a zoo at home. And this is kind of evidence of that, because this was my kindergarten class, and we walked from school to my grandmother's house where we were living to see our zoo, including the pet alligator that you see on the right side there. Something that I've noticed through life as we were growing up and collecting spiders and snakes and things, I would always have my little brother grab the biting end, and you can see that there. So I'm actually the one in the blue shirt there. But blue collar family, again, my dad also taught us a respect for nature. We had aquariums growing up. I got my first scuba tank at 6 years old and did my first scuba dive in Lake Erie. I remember just seeing one fish there the whole time, but that was my first experience diving. And that led eventually to us taking trips, family vacation trips, to the Florida Keys. And we did that for several consecutive years through junior high and high school. And we went diving. Oops. And you can see our trailer here in the background, pop-up trailer, our John boat that went on top of the station wagon, all of our scuba equipment in there. But we did really well, probably because we were diving in places where nobody else wanted to, in the channels between the islands. But you can see barely there, all the lobsters and the conch that were there. So we would go down for sport diving season, recreational season every year. And probably what really, other than the fact of diving and being in the water, even at that young age, and seeing coral reefs in the Keys, maybe back when they were definitely where they were in better shape, we were also collecting for our aquarium. We purchased the little clear nets and collected for our aquarium, and drove straight back from Florida, from Key West, 33 hours with a tick, tick, tick of a battery of a air pump, and brought some really interesting animals back. And I think that also piqued my fascination. But honestly, I was just fascinated by nature of all kinds, of every shape and form. So, okay, I knew pretty much as a career that I wanted to, study biology, work with nature, work with animals. And I originally wanted to be, maybe a common story, but wanted to be a veterinarian. And I don't know that I maybe had the grades, or I was kind of steered away from that at the time. I was told there were only a few veterinary schools and it was extremely difficult. So maybe I gave up on that dream and went to just a general biology degree. And so I ended up going to, I like small, I didn't see myself answering questions in a class of 200 people or anything like that. So I really like small schools. I ended up going to a liberal arts, a really good small school. What I found out later is an even better school if you were interested, at the time at least, in medical sciences or pre-med. So there weren't as many classes in field biology and things that I might have liked, but it was a really good program. And one of the things that I learned there, and I mentioned, passion, following your passion, is that I did really well in my biology classes, but all of those, other liberal arts, the electives, I didn't necessarily do so well, and I kind of struggled with that. And so I graduated from college. I wasn't sure. I knew I wanted to go on to graduate school. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to go into zoology or marine biology. So I applied to graduate programs in both areas. And I got a better offer from a marine biology program. So that's really what changed my life. I'm of the opinion, maybe that still exists, that graduate school shouldn't really cost you a student loan. You should be able to pay for that, or the school should more or less pay for itself. So so I did that. I ended up going to graduate school at the College of Charleston, which is another small program. I like that. Something in a graduate program that I think is really important is all the resources, everything that the facility the program has to offer. And even though College of Charleston, the Grice Marine Lab, was a very small program at the time, especially, they had a lot of resources. They had the state lab, the State Marine Resources Division had a lab there. There's now a NOAA lab, I think, up here. So they had a lot going on there for their little program. And honestly now, well, just to back up a little bit. So I really wanted to study coral reefs. Again, another kind of cliche. Everybody wants to study coral reefs. So I actually had a project lined up, went to the Bahamas to start on my project, and the funding fell through. It turns out that I ended up needing more money to do what I needed to do than I was maybe led to believe that I needed. So that project kind of fell through. And that also became kind of a turning point for me. I really didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a project. I didn't know I was going to go back to graduate school. So I went back to Pittsburgh for the summer, and my college roommate was in law school. And he said, hey, I have a job down in the city of Pittsburgh. And you mentioned I showed that photo of the city of Pittsburgh a little while ago. He said, why don't you become a law clerk with me for the summer? And so it was that experience, that opportunity that taught me that I definitely don't want to wear a tie every day. That's just not my life to get dressed up. It was a cool experience. I'm glad I had it, but you know, it wasn't something for me. So it turns out that I ended up with one of my graduate school roommates called me and he said, hey, we have a project that I'm working on for my master's. It's funded through actually a sport fishing association through the state of South Carolina. And it's really basic science in the sense that, just to say it the way it is, it was effectively a kill 'em and count 'em thesis, which again comes back to basic science. Hopefully, for the most part, we've moved beyond this now. But before we can talk about ecosystems and how they function, we really need to know what is there when it's there. And so that was my study. It was to help determine what species of fishes were utilizing the Charleston Harbor estuary, which are, like all estuaries, are nurseries. So we wanted to look at the recruitment of mainly sport fishes. The whole point of the study was to document the importance of estuaries as sources for future fisheries. And if we don't have those estuaries protected, nurseries, then we're not going to have the adults that we want to fish and that we want to eat later. So we did that survey, and I was in Charleston for longer than you're supposed to be in graduate school for a master's degree. I was there almost 4 years, and I was delayed by my change of projects and things. I also was the acting lab manager. I was a waiter full-time, which honestly I think is a good experience for anyone to do some kind of retail. It gives you a different perspective on life. So I was really busy, lived in a beach house. Probably that was what slowed me down a little bit. I had a really nice place that we were staying at. But in any case, after about 4 years of graduate school, still working towards my thesis, my defense, I was offered a job through one of my committee members. Had contacts at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum in the fish division. And he said, hey, if you're tired of being in graduate school, go ahead and apply for the position. And so I did. And I was given that position. And so I quickly ran to my major advisor, still in Charleston, you know, and I told him, hey, guess what? You know, your student has a job. And he's just sitting back in his chair, and he didn't look very excited at all. He said, great. I said, your student has a job. He said, my student isn't going to finish his degree. He said, I've seen this before. You know, you have a job, you're making money, you're going to want a life. And I said, no way, no way. I've come this far. You know, I'm almost there. All I have to do is write my thesis and defend it. I'm going to finish. And he just kept shaking his head. And I knew I was going to finish. So I said, I bet him a half a gallon of, we'll call it an adult beverage, that within 2 months of my moving to Washington, that I would have a draft of my thesis. It actually cost me 1.5 gallons in one extension of the program, but I did defend my thesis, and you can see it's written there, temporal and spatial distribution of ichthyofaunal inhabiting shallow marsh habitat of the Charleston Harbor estuary, and I already told you about that experience. So while I was there, then the next thing that happened, I moved on to DC, and I don't know, Laura, if you want me to continue. I consider this my second leg.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool how you transitioned from your undergraduate, from deciding that you wanted to do biology and environmental science, to switching over to marine focus. And I know you said you chose the College of Charleston because they offered you a really good opportunity, and they had a lot of really cool resources. And I think that advice to young career professionals is like so important when you're looking for opportunities. You know, it's not always about like what you can offer them, but also what they can offer you, especially in academia. And I think that advice is really, really important to know. But I guess where we're headed now is we're interested in the Smithsonian. We're going to the fish division. I think your background in ichthyology, which if you don't know, that means the study of fish. So ichthyology, it's a really funny Latin word, but it just means study of fish. And I think we're going to head straight into talking about the Smithsonian at large. But maybe before you get to that part, could you tell us a little bit about like your early career mentors? I know you mentioned that your dad was really pivotal in you being engaged in marine science in the Florida Keys. And your parents, I mean, they let you keep a zoo at the house with aquariums and spiders and alligators. So can you tell us a little bit more about how your relationship with your parents kind of shaped your path into natural history?
Yeah, I just, we spent a lot, it's not like, well, we would go camping, but it was mainly just being outside, being in the woods, grew up hunting, early on, which is still respectful of nature. So they were just very supportive. I remember coming back from the Florida Keys one time, and we brought some scorpions, local scorpions that were collected in the Keys back with us. Well, we discovered that one of them was missing in our family station wagon, which we slept in as we were driving back to Pennsylvania. And my mom refused to get in until we found it. You look for something like that very carefully, but we did find it. So yeah, they were very, we had made, on a few occasions, baby snakes escape in our house and mice. And so just a wild menagerie of pets, and just, and again, scuba diving. I mean, to think of my father being a scuba diver, first off, living and being from Pittsburgh, and probably, I'm certain he started diving in the late 60s when it really wasn't that common. And then to have me with my first scuba tank at around 1970 was pretty amazing, in hindsight. So, but those family trips, I mean, that was all about getting us out into nature, into the water, into the ocean, and also being able to eat lobster while we were down there, and collecting for our aquarium. One time we brought back 2 octopus, a pair of octopus, and we kept them through their lives. They actually had eggs. Now the eggs, I don't recall ever, maybe that were not fertilized, but they carried through, I would assume, through their natural lives. So I had some really interesting experiences, both on under the water and above the water, as a result of my parents' willingness to just let us explore the natural world.
That's so fun. I know we shared some similar experiences about lobstering in the Florida Keys, and in that picture, I know you shared some queen conch, which you're not even allowed to take anymore. So it just kind of goes to show you like how much things have changed. We're going to take some questions right now because we have one really good one from Ronan. I recognize the name. Thanks for joining us for the 3rd week in a row, Ronan. They want to know, did you know how many coral reefs suffered from coral bleaching when you were at graduate school? I know you're going to talk about this in a little bit, but was that part of the conversation then when you were studying marine science at Charleston?
My original project, the one that I set out to do that I mentioned, studying coral reefs, was actually related to the long spine sea urchin. And there was a big die-off of the diadema sea urchins, a very important herbivore that kept algae from overgrowing the reefs and basically suffocating or covering up corals. So that was really to be the focus of my study, and it was to happen in San Salvador, Bahamas. I honestly don't remember now. I know that one of my graduate student roommates was studying black band disease. So there was definitely there was an awareness of coral diseases. They're different than they seem to be now. That we don't hear as much about black band and white band disease, but those were the prevalent ones that were at least talked about back in the 80s.
So the like larger conversation around climate change and bleaching wasn't probably as prevalent, but there was still definitely a lot of really interesting coral research happening then.
Yeah, scientists knew already then that coral reefs were changing. The health of coral reefs were changing. And that has just continued and kind of sped up, so it seems.
Interesting. That's so cool. I mean, it's not cool that we've known about it for so long and it's still an issue, but it is fascinating to hear that it was being investigated even then. Great question, Ronan. Thank you so much. We've had a lot of other good questions. Some of them we have answered live and some of them we have messaged directly, but please feel free to use that Q&A feature and ask us your questions as we go along. Murphy says, we'll take one more and then we'll move forward through. Murphy wants to know how important are scuba skills if one wants to be a marine biologist. And specifically, Murphy wants to work with cetaceans.
Yeah, that not an uncommon pursuit at a younger age, I think, as is maybe even just in general wanting to be a marine biologist. Uh, but as far as scuba diving, I mean, being a marine biologist, one runs the wide range of opportunities. There are many marine biologists that don't want to be in the field and just want others to give them the data from the field or acquired other ways. So it really depends on what you're interested in. Obviously, if you want to work with coral reefs or ecosystems under the water, it's probably in most cases pretty helpful to be able to dive depending on the depth. Not sure it's as relevant to work on cetaceans, but one thing that I suggest to all aspiring marine biology students is that really in today's world, almost anyone can get an undergraduate degree, a degree at least in biology. So it's really, it's a super competitive field. And honestly, I might not have gotten into graduate school if I was applying now with what I had then. And it's just extremely competitive. And you really need to do things that set yourself apart. So, networking, contacting, emailing, conversing online in this case, with researchers or people that are in the field that you're interested in, and then volunteering. And that's kind of a double-edged sword. I know people who already have their degrees, probably hear the same thing, you volunteer. I was of the mindset, and I don't think this works anymore, that why would I volunteer? Why would I give someone my time? But again, when you're talking about an extremely competitive field and needing to do things that set you apart, volunteering is maybe the best way to do that. So if and you're not always in a position depending on where you live, but in a super competitive field like studying cetaceans or dolphins, that I would think would help immensely to just get more experience than the average person, because there are a lot that want to study dolphins and whales.
And I think, this is the third time we've sort of mentioned scuba diving as an interest in marine biology. I think for a lot of us, being able to breathe underwater and look closer at animals that live there, it's a pretty unique lens to start being curious about the underwater world. So I think for a lot of marine biologists, it seems like they pick that up as a hobby, usually from an early age. So, you mentioned at the early age of 6 having scuba diving, and then Katie mentioned it last week and Val mentioned it in the first week. And even I'm a hobby scuba diver, but it's really an enjoyable sport, and we've taken it into our professional careers. It's definitely not a requirement, but as Bill said, it is nice to set you apart because it is sort of difficult to obtain that. But there's a lot of really cool scholarships and opportunities for early career professionals if you want to pursue that. So we're going to kind of move on into the fish biology section. So if you want to, Bill, you've been with the Smithsonian for over 19 years now. So if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen and let's see the fish library.
There's the fish library. So yes, I left Charleston and moved to Washington, D.C. Actually lived in Arlington, and it was pretty amazing to come out of the subway every day and see, the monument in the Capitol building and walk to this building, which is the Natural History Museum. And this photo on the right is just one hallway of the collection, and you can see how far in the distance it goes. It's a pretty amazing collection of dead fish in jars, and if they're big enough, they're in stainless steel coffins and skeletons, and there's lots of different ways. And they're effectively, I would say, at one point I considered myself a dead fish librarian, because we would send out those fish now upon request from graduate students and researchers studying the taxonomy and the differences between them and the relationships within the fishes. We would send them out on loan. And so that was a big part of my job at the time, was packing up these fishes in jars, writing invoices and sending them off to researchers and then getting them back and undoing that. But I also had the opportunity, and every time in life you have the opportunity to gain experience or to gain knowledge in something that interests you, you need to take it, because they don't always present themselves, and you never know when that experience may really come in handy. So while I was in the fish division, one day a week I was charged with just going through an unsorted collection and identifying fishes, using taxonomic keys and learning them. And I always focused on what I consider to be local, the Atlantic fishes. So I gained a much better background or experience with working with being able to identify Atlantic fishes, which down the road paid off really well. So I spent a few years in the fish division, and a friend of mine happened to have an office next to Dr. Walter Ady, and I would definitely say I'll come back to that, but he is an amazing man. He is still at the Smithsonian. I don't know how often he goes in now. This is a photo of him back in the original coral reef exhibit that was set up in the Natural History Museum back in 1980 or so. And he was the first to my knowledge, to display a living coral reef for public viewing. But to him, it was a research project. It was in part tied to another project that he had later on, actually, or maybe allowed him to get that project, which was the Biosphere 2. And that's how I came to know him. He was looking for someone who could collect fishes, keep them alive, transport them to the Biosphere 2, which is in Arizona. And before I leave this slide, I just want to mention this book here. There are now 3 editions of it, Dynamic Aquaria. It is literally a textbook, but it talks about modeling ecosystems. The Dr. Ady, I consider a mastermind of ecosystem modeling, marine ecosystem modeling. We still use the technology that he developed here in order to drive that coral reef, which was to keep the nutrients levels low and the oxygen levels high. And that's what we call algal turf scrubbers. I really won't talk about them today. But an amazing, simple technology, basically using nature to take care of nature. One of the other projects, I just find it interesting because it's come back now here currently, and they're working through the Smithsonian on this, is a crab mariculture, something that he started or was experimenting with, called, I think, the golden crab, but a big, almost like a snow crab looking Caribbean crab, and trying to aquaculture them. And now there is another group that is taking his basic research, and they're carrying that further, and I think actually going to make that a reality, which is amazing, because he was looking at that back in the 1980s. But anyhow, as I mentioned, my connection to Dr. Ady initially was through the Biosphere 2. And there we go. That's the right one, sorry. Was through the Biosphere 2. And so I was basically sent on loan to Walter Ady, the Marine Systems Laboratory, which was the group that he ran and that he had outside funding for. And this is the Biosphere 2. This was in Oracle, Arizona, and just a little bit about it. It was an amazing facility technologically. I spent all of my time here in the ocean and in the savanna, which was the estuary. Walter Ady was charged with recreating basically a 1 million gallon coral reef, and I think a 750,000 gallon estuary that modeled the Florida Everglades in the mangrove habitats of the Florida Everglades. And so that was what our focus was. I was able to go down to Florida. We collected plants. It wasn't even just about the fishes for me, but everybody chipped in. Walter was pretty amazing. He was super well organized, and he knew what everybody was supposed to be doing, and he really just let people do that, and he assumed that it was going to happen that way. And to be honest with you, you didn't want to disappoint him. He was just a really good guy to work for. But that was an amazing experience. Here's a picture of me. This was actually taken inside the Biosphere 2. You can kind of make out that I'm holding a net there. So 2 years after I should just back up. So the Biosphere 2 was created to basically simulate what we would do if we were living on another planet. It was completely self-contained, not just above the ground, as you can see here, but also sealed under the ground. So, effectively it could be in space was the thinking. And these biomes were to recreate or to produce the oxygen and to help maintain a stable atmosphere. They did their own farming in there. Pretty amazing. Again, if you look it up, the Biosphere 2, I'm not sure where it stands now. I believe it's at least a tourist attraction, if nothing else. But when I went in there 2 years afterward to survey in the marshes, what I discovered is a lot of the fish diversity that we put in there had disappeared. And it had a lot to do, I think, with all of the roaches and the ants. They took over. You know, roaches, at least the natural ones, they are decomposers. They break down rotting plant material. And so that was a problem. The CO2 levels turned out to be too high near because of all this plant respiration breaking down. So I was disappointed by what we discovered in there as far as the fish diversity, but was a very fascinating study that they learned a lot about CO2 modeling and how the Earth actually works. And I think they're doing experiments still in that regard. But anyhow, the funding ran out for that position, you know, as typically in people who have grants. Dr. Walter Ade's funding ran out for the Biosphere 2. It closed, it opened again. And so I went back to the fish division. And although the fish division, you know, is really amazing. And there's, you know, everything, all the fishes you'd ever want to see there, they're dead fish in jars. And so a few months after I went back to the fish division, I had heard that the person who was managing the exhibit for Walter Ade was leaving, and I ran up there. I mean, I was dying for jumping at the opportunity to, you know, to see live fish through glass. And so this was, and a lot more. I mean, as you can see from this photo, it was a living coral reef. You can even see a seagrass bed here connected to it in the back. So I was offered that job. And this was another place that was really amazing to walk into every day. I put this photo up here for two reasons. One, we'll talk about this, but also this is a life-size model of a blue whale. You can see its tail back here. I think it was over 90 feet or about 90 feet long. It was a fiberglass model. Pretty amazing just to walk in under that every day and into my office, which was the aquarium. But I also wanted to point out this exhibit, I believe, opened in 1993. And you see the display here, coral reefs in peril. So even in 1993, we're still talking about coral reefs in peril. And you know, those letters would be a lot bigger today because our coral reefs are in extreme peril. I think back when we were scuba diving in the 70s, you know, as a family, the average live coral cover in the Keys was thought to be around 50, and this was from researchers, 50 to 60, 70% maybe were live corals versus sponges, algae, rocks, other things. Now it's my understanding that those same surveys produce percent coverages down in the 4 and 5%. So that is really sad and is in dire straits here. But our coral reefs are without question in peril. This was also when I started in the aquarium, which became the Exploring Marine Ecosystems Exhibit. When I started there, the exhibit was actually getting ready to be, in a point, broken down and then reopened as what you see here. But that was also my introduction to education. When I started at the exhibit, it was at that point turned over from Dr. Ade to the Office of Education. It was an educational facility. So that was my first real experience in working with and talking with and learning about how to be an educator. And so that was, you know, everything seemed to be falling in place. I loved my job. I liked living in the city. You know, everything was great. And then, of course, just when that happens, you know, everything changes. The museum made the decision to close the Sea Life Hall and to, even though it was just a few years old, and they were going to completely renovate it and turn it back into what I guess was its original state as a mammals hall, which is what you would see there today. So basically I was out of a home, a job, and we started looking for I was basically taking applications for places that were going to come and take our collections away, just basically dismantle the exhibit. And I was going to become an educator in a museum that at the time didn't have a Sea Life Hall. So I was really looking to also find myself in a new place. And it turns out this is where Mary Rice, and I'll show you a photo of her coming up, but she was the founding director of the Smithsonian Marine Station. And she had friends in DC, And one of the curators brought her through the exhibit and told her this exhibit was going away. It was closing down. We were looking to relocate it. And she immediately came back to St. Lucie County, here where we are now, and talked to the administrators, and they were all about it. So Dr. Ady and I came down to Fort Pierce. We did, a dog and pony show with actually slides and a carousel, and pitched the idea of a building, a small aquarium building. At the time, it was to be 2,500 square feet, and I was going to work with the architect, and it was going to be great. Everything was going to fall into place. 3 months later, I get the blueprints, the building size doubled, everything kind of changed. It was just me that was going down there, so I was a little nervous about that. But we did it anyhow. We came down, and here on the left is just the slab. Again, this building was created for us. Here's Mary Rice, again, the founding director, the director of the Natural History Museum, the associate director for research at the time. And you can see this was a really big deal in the community. This was really well attended. It was, the Smithsonian in Fort Pierce, Florida. Even though the Smithsonian had been there through the Marine Station, this was a public face to the Smithsonian. So everybody was really excited about that. Well, when I came down, and I was really nervous about, everything now, that it went from three aquariums to 6 aquariums, standing here in front of our largest one, 2,500 gallon empty coral reef tank. This was back in May of the year that we opened. And I was told not to worry. There will be plenty of volunteers. This is a great community. We will get it done, because we were going to open on the end of August. And so here we are. We got the building in the beginning of May. So we basically had 3 months to open. And my whole team of volunteers consisted of the 3 people that you see here. These 2 young ladies were I think 15 and 16 years old at the time. And I mentioned taking every opportunity you get to learn everything in life. There may be a little lesson here on her t-shirt that you can see there, but they were awesome. They came in 5-6 days a week. They took care of the fish in quarantine, hundreds of fish every day for a couple of months while we got ready. And then John Holt was retired from Harbor Branch. He was 70 years old at the time. And again, he was there 5-6 days a week, just nonstop. There were some other people that helped us, do the lifting and would come in at times, but these 3 people here, this was the core crew. And we really made it happen, and we were ready to open by the end of August.
Hey, Bill, we're just as an aside, we're getting ready to hit the 40-minute mark. So if I think you're available to stick around, but to all of our lovely attendees, keep asking us your questions, and we'll keep hearing from Bill.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to show you a few photos. Here's just me. This is you don't see this very often, but this is the infrastructure for our Atlantic coral reef tank that we built. The rock work and the corals went on. Here I am working on that tank. I realized when I was looking through photos that this photo was taken 6 days before the exhibit was to open to the public. And I'm sure this wasn't the only aquarium that looked like that. These were the corals that we brought down. They were stored for a couple of months at Dr. Ady's house in Virginia. We brought them down, and then here again, you can see me moving them in there. Well, we were able to open on time, August 28th, and we were pretty bare bones. As you can see here, the walls are white, not a lot going on in here. Even the tanks are pretty basic. I don't think I included a new photo of our seagrass exhibit, but it looks nothing like this one. It's a fully established seagrass bed now, but you can just get a sense of how basic we were and how brand new we were at the time. And now this is today, and the photos line up with the first photo that you saw, and the second one are the same halls in that order. This is taken from the opposite view though, but our dioramas, no bare walls at all in the space. We're ready to expand. And this is the Indian River Lagoon hall. So it looks, again, as an educational facility. And as I see our niche as an educational facility through the Smithsonian is really to recreate the habitats, our local marine habitats that we have here, and the food webs that they support, the organisms that are there. And anytime that we have nature go out of balance in our aquarium, as it even happens in the wild, we try to find the organism, if it's appropriate, to put into our display to fill that niche, to bring us back into balance. And when we can't do that, we get to play that role. So ultimately, I guess you could say, we play the top predator. When we have to, we play the herbivore. We go in and weed out the seagrass, trim it down on occasion. So we're really just trying to simulate nature, show people the diversity, the complexity, and the importance of our local marine ecosystems, and that why, even if you don't live on the water, these marine ecosystems in our oceans are important to all of us. You know, I've seen many amazing things over the years at the aquarium and related to my jobs with the Smithsonian, but at the aquarium here, some of the most fascinating and maybe more recent things that I've noticed that have happened for us is we have a basket star, which is a kind of a sea star that was collected for us from the Oculina, one of our displays from the Oculina habitat last summer. And a few months after that, that basket star split into two. We caught this is actually a video, but it's a photo there. And you can see right before it was splitting into two. Well, it turns out that has never been reported in science before. So we had a lot of scientists, researchers who study basket stars excited about that because that had never been reported before. And something else that I think was also a first for us was this is a staghorn coral. Here's a larger parent colony there that released gamete bundles. It basically spawned in our aquarium, and to my knowledge, that was in 2017. That had never happened before on cue, that is the same time they were spawning in nature, it was spawning or releasing egg bundles in our aquarium. So that was pretty awesome to see that happening. And I realized too that I maybe have a green thumb to a point. Really excited the first time we saw our mangrove trees flowering. Here's a little propagule starting to grow. This is a seagrass, another exhibit, but here's a seagrass flower that is also sprouting. And this happens in our aquarium the same time it happens in the field. And these are just a collection of photos. We had another species of coral that is a brooder, releases larvae, and that happens routinely for us every spring or summer since 2007. Most of the fishes that we're looking for in our lagoon exhibits are about an inch long. This is a little black grouper that can get quite large. I can't remember now, but it's like 4 feet long and maybe 100 pounds or so, but they get quite large and just see some amazing, you know, nature is beautiful to look at, especially up close. And so this is just a little shrimp and an anemone. And I never knew I would be a fan of turtles, you know, the glorious megafauna, even though this is a little diamondback terrapin, but they have turned out to be pretty awesome. And the only animals in our exhibit that I know of that have pet names so that we can distinguish them when we're feeding. So it's just been, you know, an amazing experience for me. And I look forward to sharing what we see and what we look here. You know, we have with technology, we have new microscope displays, and we're able to really showcase the world that people just don't get to see every day. And I kind of see that also as our niche here as an educational facility. That's where I am today.
And that brings us to today. So if you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen. Thank you so much, Bill, for sharing your incredible journey. I'm actually sitting here in front of the Smithsonian Marine Ecosystems Exhibit. So I'm in my office, but I do have a background of the building so you guys can get a better idea of what that looks like. But we're going to go ahead and take some questions. You ready, Bill?
Yes.
Okay. So Ronan wants to know, when you went to the Florida Keys or to other places, did you always bring a tank or container of water to collect sea creatures to bring home? And what do you think that would look like for people who are curious about that in today?
Today it might be illegal. I don't know. But back then, and we followed, in fact, one of the things that we were told when people who lived there knew we were collecting for our aquarium was don't take corals. Corals die as soon as they come out of the water. Well, we know that's not true, but the intent of that message was true and was good, and that is don't take corals out of the water. You should just take them. So we never did, but we and it would probably be a lot easier now. As I mentioned, we would just collect brand new water when we were getting ready to go. We would bring extra water so that we could do a water exchange halfway home and pack several coolers. We were kind of cramped in our station wagon on the way back. But again, we did not stop. We barely stopped to eat and get gas and to bring our animals back. And so I think today, insulated coolers and flying them back now just through it would be probably faster and safer.
So Lisa wants to know, do we use an open flow system? I know you mentioned the algal turf scrubbers before, but do you want to quickly touch on that? We're getting a lot of really good questions, guys. We're going to try and get to all of them, even though we are running a little bit over today. But like I said before, if we don't get to your question and you really want to know the answer, please feel free to email us at smseducation@si.edu, and we'll be putting all that information in the chat for you too, okay?
Our aquariums are all closed. We do use natural seawater. We draw that in, from the ocean. We run it through some ozone to make sure there's no pesticides or hopefully no herbicides or anything like that, bad bacteria or viruses. But our systems are all closed. And one of the nice things about using algal turf scrubbers, so basically using algae to remove the excess nutrients that are a result of us feeding the animals, is that it removes the nutrients to the point where you really don't need to do water exchanges for the main reason that most people need to do water exchanges on their aquarium, because our nitrate and phosphate levels really don't accumulate. We still do water exchanges on a much reduced level, not because our nutrients have accumulated, but just to make sure that we maintain the trace element balance that is in natural seawater, the amino acids that may be there. And also mainly to remove detritus. Having closed systems that don't have waves and storms and wind action, all the muck, as you will, the detritus accumulates in there. So we need to flush that, we need to remove that on occasion. So those are the main reasons for our water exchanges. But the algal turf scrubbers allow us to really mimic natural water quality.
We're going to take two more questions. One, because I think you'll really enjoy it. And the second one, because I think it's a really important note to end on. So Juliet says, hi, Bill. There are unintended additions to your tanks. I'm thinking the sponges, but there must be others. How have these affected your tanks? So first of all, sponges are wanted because they're water filterers. But maybe, Bill, you could talk about some of the little things that get in when we take our salt water.
Yeah, it's our systems are amazingly diverse. I have encouraged researchers to come look, because one thing that can happen in aquariums is that species that can potentially be pretty rare in nature can become pretty abundant in an aquarium if there's nothing to keep them in check. And as you mentioned, Laura, yeah, sponges are very important for us. That's something that we want to have in all of our model ecosystems where we can, because as you said, they're natural filters. But most of the diversity, we even see species of algae that'll pop into our aquarium, and we haven't added anything. We haven't added rocks. I used to every year would get a small cooler or so, buy a small cooler of aquacultured in the Keys, Florida live rock, and introduce that as a means of trying to bump up the diversity and keep the diversity high in our systems. I've gotten away from doing that with coral diseases and other problems that are out there. But we are constantly discovering new, mostly smaller species, and occasionally we'll see a fish or another larger animal that we haven't seen for a long time. So that's always really cool to see. One of the more obscure animals that has kind of just popped up in one of our aquariums is a benthic ctenophore. I think we have some YouTube maybe or some video of that. And that's just a really obscure animal that you'd probably never notice in nature. And it was quite abundant for a short time in one of our aquariums. Don't have any idea where it came from. So yeah, it's a discovery every day, even for the normal. We're working with live animals, so even though we go through a routine, nothing's routine about what we do here, what we see, and what we learn here.
I know one of my favorite things is, even though you've been here for 19 years, when I come into work and you're really excited about some discovery in one of the exhibits, and it's always like your passion, I think, really carries through to what you do every day. And we all appreciate that about you. So last question, my friends, you guys have some incredible questions, and I really am super thrilled to see all the engagement. We're going to take it kind of like twofold, and we're going to end on that because I recognize that we are going a little bit over today. So Isabel asks, can we go to the Smithsonian Marine Ecosystems after it's open? And Alex says, what's the best way to make connections with the Smithsonian for potential volunteers or even starting starting career positions? And I think we could answer maybe both of them in one.
Oh, you want me to answer? Yeah, the exhibit is open now under, you know, by more or less by appointment only, so greatly reduced visitorship. It's still possible to come see it. We're open Tuesday through Saturdays. We are currently not accepting volunteers. We're not allowed to have volunteers right now, but we generally depend heavily on our volunteers. And I can honestly say that a number of our volunteers here have gone on to become, you know, paid interns as a, and later even several of them pursue. I can think of one, well, not as a volunteer, but as an aquarist who now has a PhD. So it's a great opportunity. I mean, you're not only working with the aquarium and these amazing systems and the idea behind them as a result of Dr. Ady, but just all the research you're exposed to and everything else that's happening at the marine station. So I don't think at all that this, you know, I say some people are hesitant to volunteer, but again, in this really competitive field, I think you have a tremendous amount to gain by volunteering at the Smithsonian Marine Station, and especially, of course, at the exhibit.
So my friends, that's all the time we have for today. I think, Bill, thanks so much for sharing your journey and giving some really good career advice to our young career professionals who have joined us. And as you mentioned, if people want to know more or if they want to stay tuned for where we're at, definitely come visit us here at the Marine Ecosystems Exhibit in Fort Pierce, Florida. You can follow along with us on Facebook at Smithsonian Marine Station and Ecosystems Exhibit. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Smithsonian SMS. We post a lot of really great content right now. We've got summer camp packets going out, and we have the rest of our virtual career dive series, which is going to be every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. through the summer. And Aaron did share with you guys in the chat, the next one's going to be Marine Geo's Dean Janiak. And that one is really going to be exciting. We're going to learn all about the research that they do at the Marine Station in the Marine Geo department. So please make sure to check the links and register for that on Zoom if you'd like to participate and ask questions. We will be live streaming to Facebook, so if you aren't able to register, you can join us there. And we also record these and put them on YouTube for after the fact. So lots of really amazing ways that you can check back in with us if you aren't able to follow along live. Please share, feel free to share with your networks. We always appreciate that. But I think that's going to be all the time we have for today. So Bill, once again, thank you so much for joining us. I know you did a great job, and we had a lot, we learned how to use Zoom together. Thank you guys so much for joining and for participating and for all your amazing questions. Feel free to contact us, like I said, if we didn't get to your question, but we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. So my friends, that's it for today. We'll see you next Thursday.
Great.
Bye.
Bye.